everybody. We're going to get started here in just a minute. Hopefully you are all geared up for some period 4 review. Change the scene, and here I am. Good evening. How's everybody doing tonight? Coming to you from a different room tonight. Really, the only reason for doing this is just to see if I could. So I decided to change the scenery in the background. All I did was I just moved into my guest room. And what this might lead to, honestly, is both dogs in the picture. Because yes, I allow my dogs to get up on the bed, and they like to come in here and sleep while I'm gone. So maybe they'll both jump up there and you'll get both Flynn and Gilligan in the picture tonight. But other than that, we're going to go ahead and get started. I don't know if you guys have it with you, but I handed out the review sheet today during class. Don't have one? No big deal, because the big idea questions are going to be up on the screen while I'm talking through them. Your questions are always welcome. You can either put them in the chat, and that's why I'll be looking back and forth, because I have a secondary screen over here with the chat window, so I'll be going back and forth, and you can also text me via Remind, and I will answer them as much as I can. Feel free, you guys, if you see something in the chat that you can answer for someone right away, just do it. For those of you who are already here, you can help me out with people who join late and start asking questions of stuff I've already covered. Just if you could type in there, hey, go back and watch the video, because it seems like I say that an awful lot. I got my notes. I don't know what that says about me, but I bring a lot of notes to these to make sure I cover everything that needs to be covered. But that's it. I guess we're ready to go. And yeah, Riley's special guest stars, they might show up tonight. They're over sleeping out in the living room right now, but they tend to come back and forth as they hear things. So I'm going to try to get Gilligan. Gilligan might make his first appearance on APUSH review tonight. Tonight might be the night. So, I don't know. Someone just, Natalie just sent me a text message saying comments are turned off. Some people are already commenting in here, and let me check one thing for you, Natalie, if you guys just bear with me a second. So let me go and look at this here, and we'll see it. This will give other people a chance to jump in if they want. Looks like comments are on my end. All I have on my end, Natalie, and for those of you who aren't able to comment, is I just say that it's supposed to be holding any possible inappropriate comments. So that's the only thing that's going on. So you can, obviously, text messaging works to me, so you can just send me a text message and I'll answer those questions as I can. So let me go here. Oh, yeah, there you go. Some people are saying, if you're in your school account, that's probably why. All right, cool. There you go. Everyone's saying that. I wasn't even saying it. It's an NISD account thing. There you go. All right, there you go. Rebecca said the same thing. So apparently, if you're on your NISD account, you can't comment on the video. So log out of NISD, just hop on your own account, and you should be able to do it. So anyway, we're going to go ahead and get started, because we don't want to sit here all night. So let me go ahead and pull this up, and we are going to start with big idea number 1. In the era of Jefferson, whoops, here we go. In the era of Jefferson, political parties continued to argue about policy. The Supreme Court established its role in the American government, and the U.S. greatly expanded its territorial holdings. Now, I'm going to be honest with you guys. When I went to pull out my notes and start going over there, I was a little shocked, because I forgot that we started in Jefferson. And it seemed like so long ago that we talked about Jefferson coming in after the Revolution of 1800, when he defeated John Adams, and we had the big, showdown in the House of Representatives, and it took like 26, 27 votes before we got a president. But now we are in the era of Jefferson, and the first thing we're going to deal with is the debates between the political parties, the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans, and who has the power. Now, one of the first things that Jefferson had to deal with is a problem over in Europe with the Barbary Pirates. We don't really talk a lot about the Barbary Pirates, but through our trade, we were taking our merchant vessels into the Mediterranean Sea, and there they were encountering these pirates from the north coast of Africa. Now, during Washington and Adams' presidency, we were actually paying them tribute, paying them bribes to basically not take our ships. Well, when Jefferson comes into office, they are going to basically demand those same bribes. And what's going to happen is he's going to say no. And this is going to lead us to a naval war with the Barbary Pirates for a while. Now, in order to bring the war to an end, Jefferson's going to negotiate basically a lower payment. So we're still going to pay bribes to him, but it's going to be at a lower amount. That's really the first thing he has to deal with coming into office. Then he's dealing with these political party debates and the power of government. And you had this debate about how to interpret the Constitution, because really that is the foundational difference between the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans. And how do you interpret the Constitution? Because through that, you're determining how much power the federal government has. So remember, the Democratic Republicans maintained a very strict interpretation of the Constitution, meaning if it doesn't say it, you can't do it. Whereas the Federalists believed in a loose interpretation, where you had to have some elasticity in the Constitution to prepare for events that might come up down the road and stuff like that. So going into office, Jefferson's this strict constructionalist. We're not going to veer from what the Constitution says, this and that. But then he's thrown into this situation where our territory has this opportunity to expand. And of course, I'm talking about the Louisiana Purchase. Now, a lot of things led up to the Louisiana Purchase. You had the Haitian slave revolt, and that's going to lead Napoleon to want to kind of get out of the Western Hemisphere and not have to deal with the problems over here. But bottom line, Jefferson is going to send James Monroe over to negotiate a treaty with Napoleon, with the French government, and he is going to offer to buy New Orleans. Well, while Monroe is there, the French government is going to offer not only New Orleans, but the entire Louisiana territory. Now, Monroe didn't have the authority to make this purchase, but come on, you never pass up on a good deal. So he's going to end up buying the Louisiana territory for $15 million and then coming back, and Congress kind of retroactively approves the sale. But what this does is it pretty much puts Jefferson in a position where he's going to be criticized quite a bit, because there is nothing really in the Constitution that says, yeah, the president has the power to go out and buy new territory, to spend $15 million, even if it's a great deal. He doesn't really have that authority, and he's going to be attacked by the Federalists quite a bit. And we're seeing that though Jefferson has his ideals, he has his political ideologies and stuff like that, he doesn't necessarily stay on track with them all the time. Now, coming out of the Louisiana Purchase, you're going to see him also start the Corps of Discovery, the exploration of Lewis and Clark going into this new territory. New explorers like Zebulon Pike is going to come in. He's going to actually explore the southern half of the Louisiana Territory, and Lewis and Clark are going to stay more towards the northern half. And we're also, during this time period, start setting up some diplomatic relationships with the Native Americans, because Lewis and Clark are exploring all these areas. Sacagawea is their guide. She was a Shoshone Indian from Wyoming, just saying. And, so they're going to start building some diplomatic relations with some of the Western tribes, a lot of the Plains Indian tribes and stuff like that. And that's kind of important because, that our relationship with natives up to this point hasn't been all that good. Why did Hamilton, or what did Hamilton have to say? Hamilton's not dead yet, CJ. He doesn't die until 1804, so he dies a year later. But he actually goes to the press and he calls out Jefferson. And actually at one point, he attacks Jefferson for going against his political ideologies, but then he also kind of makes fun of Jefferson, saying the dude just kind of lucked into this. He's like, he wanted to buy New Orleans for $15 million, and he ended up getting all of Louisiana. Not part of a plan, so we really can't give him credit for that. It was wrong for him to do that as a Democratic Republican because he doesn't believe in it, but man, he just got lucky with this one. So that was really Hamilton's only stance on this. Remember, Hamilton's not involved in government at this time. He's not a member of the House or anything like that. So he's just putting out his editorial on that. So anyway, that we're going to see that that expansion of our territory during this time. Now, with regards to the Supreme Court, very important during this time period. This is when, we remember in the Constitution, Article 3 of the Constitution said that the judicial power was vested in one Supreme Court, but it doesn't really say exactly what that court does. And what we're going to see happen is in 1803, John Marshall is going to come in. He is the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. If you remember thinking back to that podcast we listened to and everything, there was a break in the Supreme Court because Jefferson and the Democrats were so angry with the court, the court setup that Adams had left with the midnight judges, that they didn't call the court into session for almost a year. But when it does come back in, you're going to have the very famous case of Marbury v. Madison. And in this case, Marshall is going to determine that parts of the Judiciary Act of 1789 were unconstitutional, but more importantly, that calling for a writ of mandamus of the court was unconstitutional. If you remember, a writ of mandamus is an order that someone gives someone else to do something. So I'm going to issue a writ of mandamus that you must do this. And what Marbury wanted was for the Supreme Court to issue that writ to make Madison, the Secretary of State at the time, give him his judicial commission. Marbury's going to say that is unconstitutional because that's kind of breaking the separation of powers and also as well as the checks and balances. But beyond that, beyond this case, what Marbury v. Madison does is establishes the idea of judicial review. And once we have judicial review in place, the court has a guideline now. Whereas the Constitution didn't say exactly what they could and couldn't do, Marbury is setting the precedent that the court will be the branch of government that determines constitutionality of laws. Now, we know that's going to be challenged as we go down the road, but this is the first step. And then we're going to see the Marshall Court, all the way into the late 1830s, 1840s. The Marshall Court is going to make very predominant rulings that are going to increase the power of the Supreme Court and the federal government. Every decision that Marshall's court makes actually increases the power of the Supreme Court. We're going to see a couple cases you should be familiar with. Gibbons v. Ogden, and that established the Interstate Commerce Clause, that the Congress has the power to regulate trade between states or regulate the markets between the states. McCulloch versus Maryland, that's going to establish the supremacy of the Constitution, that it is the federal law is supreme to state laws, and we saw that with the debate over the bank in Maryland and stuff like that. But the big thing you should remember about the Marshall Court is that it extends and establishes the judicial review as well as the power of the federal government. Okay? I think that's it for big idea number one. So let's go ahead and move on to big idea number two. And if you have any questions, just shoot them out there, and I'll be happy to answer them. Big idea number two. As federal power grew during this period, regional interest often conflicted and opposed it. You can see the dogs are heating up behind me. So here we go. Federal power and the different regions. The War of 1812, and guys, I don't know if I have it in my notes here. Let me back up just a little bit because I didn't talk about, I can talk about it here. The War of 1812 is actually going to start to show up, show some regional differences or lead to regional differences in our country. But what you have to understand about the War of 1812, first and foremost, is the causes of the War of 1812. You had the impressment of our sailors. You had the English trying to rile up the natives on the western frontier. Think of the Battle of Tippecanoe and William Henry Harrison, and they discovered the weapons and everything. And then you had the economic reasons. Now, during the end of Jefferson's presidency, he is going to pass the Embargo Act of 1807. The Embargo Act of 1807 basically shut down all trade between the United States and the rest of the world. And this had a profound effect on the New England merchants because they relied on trade. That's how they made their money, was through trade. And when the Embargo Act is going to be passed, that's going to hurt them, right where, where it hurts the most, and that's in their wallet. And what's going to happen is, when we go into the War of 1812, there is going to be some opposition to this war, and that's going to be from the Federalists in New England. Now, what this will lead to is the Hartford Convention. While we're fighting the war, Federalists are going to hold the Hartford Convention, and they're actually going to talk briefly about seceding from the Union. This is important because what you're going to see happen is the rest of the country views the War of 1812 as very popular, and they have a very high opinion of it. And when you start hearing the Federalists talking about the negative side of the war, about the fact that they're being hurt from it, and that the New England merchants are being hurt by the war and all this other stuff, what you're going to see happen is people are going to start turning on the Federalist Party. And they're going to see them basically as almost anti-American, if you will. I mean, that's a strong statement, but they're seeing them as kind of, they're the outside party trying to take away the joy of winning the War of 1812. Now, someone just asked me, why was the Embargo Act passed? The Embargo Act was Jefferson's response to what was happening with our trade vessels going overseas. If you remember correctly, England and France were at war during this time, and we were trying to stay neutral. Our ships were being stopped by both English and French ships. Our sailors were being impressed. Blockades were being set up so we couldn't trade. We went through things like Macon's Bill No. 2 and stuff like that, trying to alleviate those. The Orders in Council was passed by England, and you guys can go back and look all that stuff up. But bottom line, Jefferson said, enough. I don't want to deal with this anymore. I don't want to deal with the impressment. I don't want to deal with the blockades. We're just not going to trade with anybody. It's kind of like the equivalent of a foreign policy of taking your ball and going home. The game just stops. And that's what happened. And that's why he passed the Embargo Act. Horrible decision. Because it does. It just shuts down our economy. But Jefferson, this is in 1807. We're getting towards the end of his second term. He's not happy in the presidency. He just wants it all over. And so, that's why it was passed. And, we still have the problems going on, though. And when Madison comes into office, the first 4 years he's dealing with the economy and stuff like that. That's when the Macon's Bill No. 2 is passed. That's when we start opening up some trade, and then the impressment starts all over again. It just, all Jefferson did was he paused the problem. He didn't solve it. Madison comes in, tries to solve it. There is no solution. And so then we look at going to war, and we declare war on England. War of 1812, known as, the Second American Revolution. Like I said, very popular with the Americans. We're going to end up fighting this war to a draw. I'm going to answer that question here in just a second. I'll answer it now. Did he want an agricultural-based economy? Absolutely, he did. He wanted to maintain mercantilism. Jefferson coming into office, he wanted to maintain the idea of mercantilism, not necessarily where we're, we have a mother country or anything like that, but the idea that we send our raw materials across the ocean and then they come back as finished goods, because he wanted us to focus on agriculture. So you could make the argument that the Embargo Act of 1807 probably wouldn't hurt, it would hurt the New England merchants first. Maybe not so much the farmers yet, but eventually it's going to hurt everybody, and he just didn't have the foresight, or he didn't see what was coming down the road to understand what was going to happen. So yeah, all that's true. When the war was fought, we fought it to a draw. Basically, you're going to have, the Battle of Fort McHenry. That's when Star Spangled Banner is going to be written by Francis Scott Key, and all the, that's going to go on. James Madison's going to run, and the White House is going to get burned, and all this other stuff. We tried to invade Canada. We weren't very successful. The War of 1812, there was nothing gained from the actual war. What we gained, though, while the Treaty of Ghent was being negotiated in Belgium, we were still fighting over here. The Treaty of Ghent is signed on Christmas Eve. We don't get word of it for a month or so. In the meantime, we're still fighting, and Andrew Jackson down in New Orleans is going to become the hero of America because he's going to beat back the British at New Orleans, win that battle in January of early 1815. So we win that battle. All of a sudden we hear the treaty's been signed, and we put two and two together and say, yeah, we won the war. Everything's awesome. And what we're going to see that's going to grow out of this is this huge idea of nationalism. Well, timing is everything. And about the same time we're hearing about the Battle of New Orleans, winning that, about the Treaty of Ghent, that's when the Federalists show up in Congress from the Hartford Convention saying, we have these demands. And actually, what happened was the Federalists literally had no idea about the American attitude at this point. If they could have just had a pulse on the American society and the American feelings at this point, they probably never would have gone into Congress and said, hey, meet our demands or we'll secede from the Union. Because when they did that, they are seen as basically anti-American. They were, this is going to be the end of the Federalist Party, as we know it. And it just, this is what ushers us into a one-party system where just the Democratic Republicans now have control. So we're coming out of the War of 1812, huge nationalism. Another huge effect of the War of 1812 is during this time, and you can actually go back to the Embargo Act. So go back to the Embargo Act of 1807, coming through the War of 1812. So we're right about 1815, 1816 at this point. America is starting to become self-sufficient. When we weren't trading, we started to see the growth of manufacturing here. We started making our own manufactured goods. And so this is going to literally allow America to become self-sufficient and not dependent on trade with Europe. Doesn't mean we want to stop trading. Just means we're not reliant on it anymore. And this is going to lead us into the end of Madison's presidency and the beginning of Monroe's presidency. And during this time, what you're going to see happen is this is when Henry Clay is going to introduce his American system. And remember, the American system had three parts. It was rechartering the national bank, infrastructure, internal improvements, and finally a tariff to help rebooster New England trade. New England had been hurt by the Embargo Act. New England had been hurt by the War of 1812. The tariff is going to help rebuild industry and trade in New England, and that was the goal of it. The problem is these regional interests, the regional conflicts are going to play a role into this, because what we're going to see with the American system is it doesn't benefit all three regions of our country. At this point, we had the North, we had the South, and we had the West. The North is going to benefit from the tariff. The North is going to benefit from the bank. The West is going to benefit from the infrastructure as well as the bank. The South is going to be hurt monumentally by the tariff. And they're also not going to see the push for internal improvements as well, because it wasn't much as needed as it was in the North and the West. So the South is going to feel left out from this. Now, Madison is going to initially veto the infrastructure part of the American system because he believed that should be a state responsibility. States should build their own roads. States should build their own bridges, their own canals, stuff like that. When Monroe comes into office, he's going to sign that into law, okay? But the American system is going to it's going to boost our economy, it's going to help our country, but it's also going to create more regional conflict because of who the American system benefited at this time, okay? Excuse me just a second. I got to grab my water over here. Otherwise, I'm going to start hacking real quick. Okay, sorry about that. All right. So anyway, Westward Expansion also is going to start taking off during this time. Westward Expansion, at at this point, like mid-18 teens, going throughout the 19th century, so going throughout the 1900s is going to be, or the 1800s is going to be very important to America. It's going to become part of our identity at this point. And so as we see westward expansion starting, we're going to start moving into the Louisiana Territory. And one of the first areas that we're going to move into is Missouri. Missouri in 1819 is going to apply for statehood. And a lot of people had been moved into Missouri already, and they had taken their slaves with them. So it was assumed when Missouri applied for statehood, they would be a slave state. Once they applied, though, Talmadge is going to introduce an amendment to Missouri statehood. And the Talmadge Amendment is basically going to say that Missouri should be a free state. And what we have here is we have the federal government in conflict with the southern region of our country. Because what's happening is, as new states come in, the question of will they be free or will they be slave states starts to come to the forefront of the Senate. The South is worried would I say that the American system is what started the split of the Democratic Party? No. And I'll hit to what I think started the split right after I talk about when I get a little bit further. What I really think started the split of the Democratic Party is going to be the Panic of 1819. So when I get to that, the American system, I think the American system had more an effect on the regions of our country versus the politics of our country. Because remember, when the American system was put in place, we had a one-party system, and that one-party system goes all the way up until like 1824. So I don't think that really added to the split. My opinion, you might, if you can make the argument that it does, go for it. Because, it's, like I said, a lot of times it's not what's right or wrong. It's what you can prove with evidence, okay? So, back to Missouri. The fear from the South is if Missouri comes in as a free state, then you're going to have more free state representation in the Senate. And then anything the Southern or slave states would try to put before the Senate would get voted down. And so that's where you're going to have this big debate over whether or not Missouri should be free or a slave state. So did the federal government interfere with the state government in the Missouri Compromise? In a sense, I think they did. There was nothing, CJ, at this point that, said that it was federal government, because, let me go back. Remember, when we set up, the land ordinance of 1785 and the Northwest Ordinance of 1787, and all during that time, we basically set up the precedent that every state would come into the Union equal, that there wouldn't be different rules or different conditions for states coming in, that if a state came in, all they had to do was meet the population requirements and the state constitution requirements and everything that was outlined in that land ordinance. Well, what happened was, so you have that on the table. You also have a precedent set under the Articles of Confederation, where the Northwest Ordinance was set up as a free territory, because the Articles Congress said that the Northwest would be free, that there'd be no slave states allowed. So, you have these two conflicting precedents being set. And, no one has a clear-cut answer. So when Missouri comes in, and we haven't had this debate also, I should say, with other states that have been brought into the Union. There was no discussion with Kentucky. There was no discussion with Tennessee. As I mentioned in class, there was no discussion with Alabama. But Missouri, a lot of, it sits right between the North and the South. And I think that's why there was such a big debate here. So we're going to have this debate, and, you'll have the southern states, a couple, not seriously, not, in depth, but, that word secession always gets thrown around and stuff like that. Well, Henry Clay is going to step in, and we're going to have the Missouri Compromise, also known as the Compromise of 1820, that's going to basically determine that the 3630 line, everything north of that line, if a state comes in, will be a free state. Everything south of that line will be a slave state. Missouri will be a slave state, and Maine will balance the Senate by coming in as a free state. And so that's how we solved that problem. But like Thomas Jefferson said, though, I remember we did that quote where he said that this is just a temporary solution. He said, remember we talked about having the wolf by the ear, and that Thomas Jefferson felt as if he was hearing the knell being played, those funeral bells being played on behalf of the country, because he goes, this is going to be the death of our country if we don't solve this problem. So the Missouri Compromise, solved the problem, but for the moment, but it didn't provide a permanent solution. Okay? Any other questions about this before I move on to big idea number 3? All right, I'm gonna move on. If you have questions, just pop them up, and I'll get them. Big idea number 3. During this period, the United States sought to establish its place as an independent nation on the world stage by claiming territory and consolidating control over the Western Hemisphere. Louisiana, obviously, that was a big get for us. That was a huge territorial expansion, but we still have some questions about borders and stuff like that. So, honestly, big idea number 3 is really about John Quincy Adams. John Quincy Adams is going to be imperative, or he's going to be, monumentally involved in setting the borders of our country. He's going to go over to England, and he's going to negotiate our northern border at the 49th parallel. He's going to do that. He's also going to negotiate at the Convention of 1818 that the Oregon Territory is going to be shared between the United States and Great Britain. He's going to establish that as well. And I think the big one is, he's also going to go and negotiate the Adams-Onus Treaty with Spain. There was some concern with Spain, with what was going on with them. They still held on to Florida. They still had most of the Western territory at this point. This was before Mexico had got that land from Spain. And so we really wanted to kind of get Spain out of our direct line of sight. So Florida, if you look at America, Florida was right in our line of sight. So the Adams-Onus Treaty is going to be negotiated, and Spain is going to end up ceding all of Florida to the United States. So we're getting, we're basically setting up our boundaries, setting up our borders, setting up what will become the permanent borders of the United States of America. At the same time, we want to establish our power, our authority in the Western Hemisphere. And this is when the Monroe Doctrine is going to be written. Now, it's actually going to be written by John Quincy Adams. It's not an official document. It was written as part of James Monroe's State of the Union address to Congress. But in this document, or in this speech, we are going to basically claim our territory, mark our territory. As Highlander would say, we're going to tell the rest of the world that we are taking ownership of the Western Hemisphere. You had a number of South American and Central American countries that had gained their independence during the past 20 years. We didn't want to see Europe come back in and try to recolonize them and stuff. So we basically said, stay out of our territory. Now, it wasn't a move for the United States to get more territory in Central or South America. It was a preemptive move to keep Europe out. Now, interestingly, you can argue, well, how is America going to be able to do this? We're not some major superpower, at this point. But, what we had, though, what the support we had, now is called the Monroe Doctrine. What we had England's backing. England supported us in saying that we're going to defend the Western Hemisphere. Now, why would England do this? Quite honestly, trade. They wanted to set up their own trade agreements with these different countries, not colonizing, but just economic relationships. And so, keeping other foreign countries out just benefits them as much as it would benefit us. So, United States, Marxist territory, we're like the Western Hemisphere is ours. It doesn't seem real important right now, but when we get to Unit 6, when we get to Unit 7, the Monroe Doctrine is going to definitely come back into play. So it's important that you understand what's going on with that right now. Okay? So that's pretty much all of big idea number 3. It's we're establishing our borders, and like I said, John Quincy Adams basically helped establish all of those. Okay? All right. Moving on. We're on big idea number 4. Here we go. I don't know. Can you guys hear my dogs? They're like in the hallway here just wrestling. So I don't know if it's annoying or not. It's annoying to me, but all right, I got a question coming through. Hang on just a second. So, Adams' Onus Treaty was basically Spain giving us Florida. Bingo. That was it exactly. We had already, we had, if you want to go back to Pinckney's Treaty, we already had an arrangement to get the Mississippi, and then we bought New Orleans, we bought Louisiana. Now we just want Spain completely out of this side of the country. So that's what the Adams' Onus Treaty did. I can't remember the price. I want to say we paid like $10 million for Florida. I think that was the price. Don't quote me on that one, though. All right, here we go. Big idea number 4. The market revolution was the linking of northern industry with western and southern farms, which was created by advances in technology and had significant effects on the society and the culture of the United States. So what we're looking at here, guys, is this impact of taking the industry of the North and combining it with the farm and agricultural products of the South as well as the Western farms. And the impact, guys, of this on our country was massive. This is when, we're going through this period of nationalism. And what we're going to see is this market revolution is actually going to start bringing our country together. We're still going to have our regional differences. We're still going to have our regional debates, but economically, we are becoming dependent. Each region is becoming interdependent on the other, and that's what the market revolution is going to set up. Now, technology plays a huge role in this. It starts with inventions like the cotton gin and the spinning jenny. The cotton gin, like we talked about, allowed cotton farmers or cotton, to produce all sorts of that was weird. All sorts, or they can clean cotton a lot faster than they were able to. This cotton that can now be shipped up to the factories in the North, and where they have this new technology called the spinning jenny, where they can start making their own fabric and stuff like that. But these weren't the only inventions. Interchangeable parts, another invention by Eli Whitney. Interchangeable parts becomes the basis for American manufacturing. Because what it does is it allows us to move into mass production. Instead of making one gun at a time, instead of making one plow at a time or whatever, we are now mass producing because of interchangeable parts. And we're going to see the more we produce, the more we consume. So you're going to see, as with the market revolution, as our production starts to grow, so does our consumption. We start to become a consumer-based society. We move away from like the cottage industry style lifestyle where you had farmers like growing just enough for their family and making their own tools or making their own farm implements and stuff. Now you can just go buy it. And so we're becoming more and more of a consumer society. On top of that, you're going to have Robert Fulton introduce the steam engine. The steam engine initially is going to have a huge impact on shipping, like in the canals and on the rivers and stuff, because, like he said in the video yesterday, you can go both ways up and down the river. You don't have to rely on the wind and your sails and all that other stuff. So steamships are going to make trade goods much more accessible wherever there's waterways. So, that's adding into it as well. The government's also going to get involved as well. This is when you're going to see the government, that infrastructure part of the American system. The government's going to start stepping in, building roads, building canals, building bridges to make the transportation of goods that much easier. On top of that, the steam engine, we're going to see that move not only from steamships into the iron horse, the railway. The railroads are going to start being built during this time. And we haven't really talked a lot about it, but the government is going to start giving money to companies to build more and more railroads. So if I own a railroad company, the government will give me subsidies or pay me to build railroads. So, it's a private business, but the government is going to help finance that for me. And so we're going to see railroads start to spread across our country as well. And so what's happening is our nation, our country is being knit together economically. The South, while they still trade with Europe and the New England still trades with Europe, they're also trading with each other a lot. the textile industry starts to become more and more dependent on the cotton goods coming up from the South. Farm goods from the West are also going to be taken to New England and stuff like that. So you're seeing our country economically come together, and that's the major impact of the market revolution. It's also going to encourage immigration. During the 1830s and 40s, you're going to see a large wave of immigrants coming over, predominantly from Ireland and Germany. And there's going to be pull factors bringing them in. That's the industry and jobs and opportunity. But there's also going to be push factors, things that are pushing them out. And I'm sure you're familiar with the potato famine in Ireland is going to bring a lot of people over. When did the market revolution start and end? I mean, you can argue that the market revolution started in 1793 with the invention of the cotton gin, but it wasn't just a day one it starts and then day it ends. I mean, technically the market revolution is still kind of going on today if you want to get right down to it, because we still have a lot of interaction between the states and everything. But when you're going to see the market revolution start to grow is with the invention, this industrialization, these new industrial inventions coming up: the cotton gin, the spinning jenny, the steel plow, the interchangeable parts, the mechanical reaper. All of these things, just coming, being inspired at the same time that the American system comes in, where infrastructure is going to start coming in and stuff like that. So all of those things work together. Again, the big outcome of the market revolution: economic interdependence of the United States. We're dependent on one another for our economy. It's not the South is making money, the North is making money, the West is making money. They're all dependent on each other to make money. Okay? Back to the immigration part of it, we have Germans coming in, we have Irish coming in, but it's not just them. You also have Jewish people coming in. You have English people are still coming, Scottish people are coming. Western Europe, a lot of people still coming over. And what's going to happen is they're going to settle along the eastern seaboard because that's where the jobs are. That's where the factories are being built and stuff like that. And basically what it's going to do is it's going to change and influence the structure of our cities. Unfortunately, it's also going to bring a lot of poverty into our cities. These people are going to be looking for places to live and everything, and you're going to see tenements, these real quick buildings thrown together that they can live in. The living conditions in the city were very poor due to poor sanitation and lack of fresh water and stuff like that. But you also start to see cultural traditions starting to be shared within the city. You start to see ethnic enclaves or ethnic neighborhoods being established that still exist today and everything. And you start to you honestly, guys, you start to see this idea of the melting pot of America. All these different nationalities coming in and bringing their cultures in, and it starts right here during this time. And this is another effect of the market revolution. Another part of the market revolution, we're going to start to see the rise of the middle class. You're going to see business owners and everything start to prosper, start to make more money. And you're especially going to see this in the North. Businessmen and doctors and lawyers are going to start making up what we call today the middle class. So you're starting to see economic classes and stratification starting to occur within our country during this time as well. And then finally, we got to talk about, we also got to talk about women during this time. Women are going to be expected to fall into that cult of domesticity. This idea, this sphere, that the women's sphere of influence, sphere of existence is in the home. Keep maintaining the home and maintaining the household and stuff like that, and providing a haven of rest for the men when they come home. But women weren't just in the home. We also see the growth of women in society. The big thing you should know about this point is the Lowell system. The Lowell girls, you have in Lowell, Massachusetts, young teenage girls basically working in these Lowell factories and living in the Lowell towns. I'm not sure if I'm going to talk about it later, but I'm going to talk about it now. You also start to see women want to be more involved in politics and stuff like that. So you're gonna, we'll get to reform, but we'll talk about the women's movement and understanding the women's movement towards suffrage and stuff like that. We're going to have the Seneca Falls Convention, and I'll talk about that a little bit later when I get to reform. But all of this was happening, and you can really put a lot of this under this market revolution, if you will. Another question. Let me go back here. I thought I saw one come in. Maybe not. Nope, that's an old one. Okay. All right, so that's kind of wrapping up big idea number 4. Okay? Any questions about that before I go on to big idea number 5? All right. Don't see it, so we're going. Big idea number 5. Oops, jumped one. Sorry. All right, big idea number 5. During this period, the demand for expanding democracy manifested itself in universal white male suffrage and the growing influence of political parties. Here we go. Ivan, you asked me a little bit ago about the start of the split of the Democratic Party. Let me talk to you briefly about the Panic of 1819. Now, this was one of the first economic panics, or, one of many, but economic panics of our country's history. And this one was caused primarily by bank failures, poor bank management, unemployment, that kind of stuff. And it's going to lead to a minor depression in our country. And the people who are going to be hit the hardest by this are going to be the laborers, the common man, if you will. They were going to be hit the hardest. And what they're going to realize at this point is they have no say in what's going on, in the decisions that are being made in the country and everything, because at this point, non-landowners, so if you did not own property, you couldn't vote. And this became apparent during this economic panic. Now, it's during this time that you're going to see the call for property requirements to be removed from voting restrictions. So it's and quite honestly, some of the frontier states, some of the states out west already had universal male suffrage. So going into the early 1820s, the Western states typically have a lot more independence. Very early on, they tend to give more political rights earlier than states in the East, and a lot of it's due to need. But this push for universal white male suffrage is going to start in the early 1820s. By 1825, we're going to see that expand. A lot of that has to do with the corrupt bargain, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. But this was, we give Jackson a lot of credit, and rightfully so. But I want you to understand that this movement started a little bit earlier than Jackson. And this is when we're going to start seeing the realignment of the political parties. We're still technically a one-party system. But going into the election of 1824, you're going to see 4 candidates put up for the presidency. And it's they all fall under the Democratic Republicans, but there's a little bit of a split at this time. You're starting to see the National Republicans, who favor more of a loose interpretation of the Constitution, and you're starting to see the Democratic Republicans, who follow more of a strict interpretation. So you're starting to slowly see the split at this time. And you see it into the election of 1824, which I'll talk about a little bit here in just a second. But really, this 5-6 year period from 1819 to about 1824, we're going to see that push for male suffrage to grow, for those property requirements to be removed. And you're going to start seeing more people wanting to get involved in the system, which is important because that takes us into big idea number 6, where we're going to see the election of Andrew Jackson. Let me before I do that, let me go ahead and talk real quickly about the corrupt bargain. I'm sorry, I should have done this back here. I mentioned 4 candidates running in the election of 1824, and I kind of just glazed over it. But remember, of those 4, 3 of them, we didn't have a clear-cut winner. Jackson won the popular vote, but nobody won the majority of the electoral votes. And when that happens, just like we saw with Jefferson in 1800, the vote goes to the House of Representatives. Now, Henry Clay was kind of bringing up the rear of the pack. Now, he is the Speaker of the House at this point. So you have the candidates who are still in the running: John Quincy Adams, Andrew Jackson, William Crawford's in there, but he's kind of a, no effect at all in any of this. And then Henry Clay. Henry Clay is going to shift his votes or tell his supporters to put their support in the House behind John Quincy Adams. This is going to elevate Adams above Jackson in the House of Representative votes. And, if that wasn't bad enough, because remember, Jackson had the popular vote, but if that wasn't bad enough, not 10 seconds after John Quincy Adams is named the winner of the election, he names Henry Clay as his Secretary of State. And all the Jackson supporters are like, whoa, wait a minute, foul play here, something went on, and this has come known as the corrupt bargain. The idea that Henry Clay traded his votes, his supporters, for a position in the cabinet, specifically the Secretary of State's position in John Quincy Adams' presidency. This is going to lead to the campaigning of Jackson. This is going to lead to, honestly, a bigger split. The split had started, but it's going to cause more of now it's not just a split, it's a divide in the Democratic-Republican Party. And we're going to have the National Republicans and the Democratic Republicans who will become known as the Whigs and the Democrats. So the National Republicans who support a loose interpretation of the Constitution, they will become known as the Whigs. The Democratic Republicans who favor a strict interpretation of the Constitution, they will be known as the Democrats. Sometimes you will hear them called Jacksonian Democrats as well, okay? Now that will take us to big idea number 6. Big idea number 6. President Andrew Jackson made a profound use of federal power on issues like the National Bank, tariffs, federally funded internal improvements, and the forcible removal of American Indians from their lands. We're just going to go one by one by one. Let's start first with the tariffs. One thing that Jackson's going to inherit from John Quincy Adams is the Tariff of 1828, known as the Tariff of Abominations. The Tariff of Abominations was a protective tariff that actually increased import taxes by 50%. And as we've mentioned before, tariffs hurt the South. And a 50% tariff is really going to hurt the South, and it's going to hurt them bad. And so at the time, Jackson's vice president was John C. Calhoun. The Whigs were given that name. They were named after, a party that was over in Great Britain. There's really no rhyme or reason to why they had that name. Just know the Whigs. So anyway, this Tariff of Abominations. The North loved it. The South hated it. And because, like I said, the South relies on imports. They rely on exports, too. And so this is going to hurt them a lot more. Calhoun, Vice President of the United States, is going to hearken back to the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions that Jefferson and Madison wrote back in the 1798, 1799, where they said that if a federal law is hurting a state, the state has the right to nullify that law. And so John C. Calhoun is going to encourage his home state of South Carolina to nullify the Tariff of 1828. This is going to end up being a major standoff between the federal government and the state of South Carolina. Jackson, a lot of people expected him to side with South Carolina. I mean, as a Southerner, as a Democrat, he falls in line with him, but he also believed in maintaining the Union. And so he is going to threaten to invade and take the military down to South Carolina to force them to pay the tariff, to collect the tariff. what's going to end up happening is the great compromiser, Henry Clay, is going to step in and negotiate a lower tariff. He goes, why don't we just lower the tariff? And everyone's like, oh, that's a good idea. Why didn't we just do that a week ago? I don't know. But anyway, so that's what happens. But the Congress also passed the Force Bill. And the Force Bill actually gave Jackson the power to take federal troops into the state of South Carolina to enforce federal law. A lot of people saw that as an infringement on state power. The idea of federal troops coming in. We saw it with Washington and the Whiskey Rebellion, but this is an actual law that's given Jackson that power, and that bothers people a little bit. But bottom line, it ends up, the tariffs reduced, crisis averted for now. And we haven't solved anything yet. The next thing I want to talk about is Jackson's war on the bank. Jackson believed that the National Bank was unconstitutional, even though McCulloch versus Maryland said it wasn't. He still believed it was unconstitutional. He also believed that the National Bank benefited the wealthy. Now, Jackson was the voice of the common man. He was the voice of the working man. And he believed that the National Bank was in place to help the rich get richer and prevent the poor and the middle class from growing. And so what he wants to do is he wants to bring it into the National Bank. The National Bank had been rechartered in 1816 for 20 years. It was up for renewal. Henry Clay and the Whigs tried to pass it earlier. In 1832, they tried to pass the bank bill, which would recharter the bank earlier. Jackson is going to veto that bill. And apparently they didn't have enough votes to override his veto. On top of that, he is going to use his executive authority or his interpretation of his executive authority to start pulling money out of the National Bank and putting those monies in state banks, which were called his pet banks. And so that was his way of completely destroying the bank. And we won't have another national bank. That will be the end of the national bank in our country from that point on. So more on that later. Not this test. Next, the Native Americans. That's the big one. We spent a whole week talking about Jackson and the Native Americans and the Indian removal policy and all the Cherokee. The Indian Removal Act is going to be passed in 1830. That's going to say that, the Cherokee specifically could be removed from their ancestral lands, and be moved into Western lands. And, they could go voluntarily or they would be forced off. Now, we also talked about how at that point you had a negotiation. You had the Cherokee split into two parties. The minor party, the treaty party is going to negotiate the Treaty of Dakota. And that treaty is basically going to set aside a large piece of Western land that the Cherokee can move on. Not all the Cherokee agreed. Obviously, the treaty party was in the minority. So while some Native Americans, moved and chose to, go to this land, others decided to, silently protest and stay. And that's going to lead to the Trail of Tears. Trail of Tears starts in 1838. Now, that's outside of Jackson's presidency. At this point, we're in Martin Van Buren's presidency, but Jackson is credited and blamed with the Indian removal policy. So the Trail of Tears, we're going to see 16,000 Cherokee Native Americans moved from their land. On that trip west, over 4,000 are going to die. That's why it's called the Trail of Tears. Question here. Does the Constitution say that the president has the power to take money out of the bank at all, or was Jackson sort of being hypocritical? Jackson was kind of being hypocritical. According to the Constitution, the House of Representatives controls the purse strings of our country. They control the money. That's why you see today all these bills talking about infrastructure and, the $1 trillion, what is it, 20 trillion, or it's like $5 trillion Build Back Better, whatever it's called. All of that is originating in the House of Representatives because they are the ones who set the budget. The Senate has to approve it, but the House, controls it. The president does have some power, to issue funds, like in case of national emergencies and stuff like that. Jackson, at this point, he just used he did an executive order to move the money around. So there you go. All right. There we go. Someone's answering a question. Thank you for answering that question there. All right. So that was Jackson. It ended horribly. What was the significance of Martin Van Buren's presidency? CJ, I didn't really talk a lot about his presidency, but here's the bottom line. His nickname was Martin Van Ruin. He's going to come in. Now, because of economic decisions made by Jackson during this time, specifically his war on the bank, we're going to see that, Van Buren is going to inherit a very weak economy. And we're going to actually have two economic panics. You're going to have the Panic of 1837, which, was dealt by a lot of land speculation, poor banking practices, currency, inflation, stuff like that. You're going to have the Panic of 1839, which is just a continuance of 37. Things started to get better, and then it crashed again. And that all happened during Martin Van Buren's presidency, and he did not have an answer for it. And so he's going to be blamed for the economic crisis of the late 1830s. You ever get a chance and you want to talk about economic policy and economic failures in our country, you can, if you're doing an LEQ or something like that, you can compare Martin Van Buren to Herbert Hoover and Jimmy Carter. All three inherited a very unstable economy, and all three faced an economic crisis during their presidency, and all three failed to have an answer to deal with any of it. So the significance of Van Buren's presidency, as hand-selected by Jackson, he didn't have an answer for the economic crisis. He's not even going to run for re-election. So there you have it. Was the reason... Okay, the reason why the United States sided with Cherokee during Worcester versus Georgia was because Georgia was forcing a U.S. citizen. Yes, that's exactly it. It was where Cherokee Nation versus Georgia. What Marshall ruled in Cherokee Nation was that the Cherokee did not have standing in the Supreme Court because he ruled them as a dependent nation within the boundaries of Georgia. So he said it's Georgia's issue. When we get to Worcester, you have an American citizen on behalf of the Cherokee Nation going to court against Georgia. And in that case, the federal government does have the Supreme Court does have the authority to hear that case. So Brad, that's it right there. Okay? All right. Let's move on to big idea number 7 because, oh my gosh, it's 8:30 already. Big idea number 7. Americans labored during this period to define a distinct American identity through language, philosophy, art, and religion. Americans really were working to get an identity. And during this time period, predominantly going into the 1830s, into the 1840s, you're going to see the development of this American identity. And when I say an American identity, it's not just an identity within us, but it's an identity throughout the world. And our identity is really going to grow out of this philosophy of Transcendentalism. And now Transcendentalism is not an American original idea. It grew out of the European Romanticism and this idea of human perfection. But what we said is that the Transcendentalists believed in this pursuit for perfection, if you will. And they believed in the power and the beauty of nature. And they saw that, they asked themselves, how can I learn from nature? How can I strive for perfection through nature? And you're going to see people like Ralph Waldo Emerson address these topics, and you're going to see Henry David Thoreau go and live in nature for a year and try to live this perfect life. And what we're going to see is this idea that society can be improved if the individual isn't improved. And so as a society, we should strive for perfection as well. If the individuals are transcending towards perfection, then society will do the same. Now we're going to see this being expressed through art, through literature, through religion. Art, we talked about the Hudson River School. We talked a lot about that with the romanticized views of the landscapes and everything like that. Most of those were the Hudson River School was established in New York, so a lot of those paintings, a lot of those landscapes came from New York and the Western territories, and so that actually became American art. That's the art that was shared with the world. Novels, books, and stuff are going to be written. You're going to have American authors like Thoreau, like Emerson, like others that are going to create this American identity through their words. We're also going to see another major religious movement come through our country during this time. We refer to it as the Second Great Awakening. So we're transcendentalists. We're looking at, working towards, perfection. The Second Great Awakening and Christianity and religion throughout our country is going to look at the moral reformation of our society. And that's a step towards perfection as well. And what we're going to see is the movement of camp meetings and revivals. And these meetings, they'd have them out in the woods, and, they'd go on for like 10 or 12 days, and they'd have speakers coming and speaking, evangelizing and sharing. Charles Finney was one of the most famous Second Great Awakening evangelists or pastors during this time. And the thing is, what you got to remember, these camp meetings, and I don't know if I talked about this in the video or not, they were very egalitarian. I mean, you had men and women and freed blacks and African slaves there and Irish and Germans, and everyone was welcome at these camp meetings. So, like I said, it was it was a very egalitarian style of meetings and stuff. So this is going on at the same time. Well, what all of this is going to lead to, this identity in, this new identity in our art and in our religion. And we're going to see different, religious groups coming out of this. The Baptists and the Methodists are two new groups that are going to come out of this. You're going to see this idea of utopian society starting to evolve. One of the most famous ones is the Oneida Society. And the Oneida Society, basically what they said, they took on this idea, and I don't want to get too much into the religious philosophy of it, but they took on this idea that Jesus had already come back, that we were living in the world after the second coming, and because of that, we all needed to live together in a society where all of us were equal and we shared everything, and for lack of a better description, we were all married together. We were all one. And the Oneida, so you had this Oneida utopian society, during this time as well. And so we're developing these ideas. Some obviously, kind of out there and everything, but some still remain today, like the art and the literature and stuff like that. So that's all going on during this time. The burned over district, Jonah asked if I could explain the burned over district. This was the district in Western New York. This is where Charles Finney started his mission, to share, to evangelize and everything. And basically, it was stated that he kind of went through there like a fire and just burned over Western New York with all these camp meetings and all these revivals and all this other stuff. And that's where a lot of people feel that the Second Great Awakening got its start. That's like kind of ground zero for the Second Great Awakening. The Mormons are going to come out during this time as well. They're going to be a religious sect that's going to get started by a man by the name of Joseph Smith. Joseph Smith is going to claim that he had a vision from God, that he had to, I'm trying to get down to I don't want to get into the nitty gritty, but he had a vision from God that he was supposed to start this faith, go back to the old ways of doing things, because we had veered away from the teachings of Jesus. And then at that time, excuse me, at that time he was also told that he had a vision that there were these gold plates that were buried, I believe, in the mountains of New York, and that he was going to go find these plates. And when he discovered these plates became what was known today as the Book of Mormon. But his beliefs kind of got out there a little bit, and he was actually killed. And then Brigham Young is going to take up the mantle of the Mormon faith, and then they're going to start moving west, and they're actually going to set up a theocracy in Utah, in the Salt Lake region. So, do you need to know the exact values of deism and Unitarianism? You don't need to know the exact values. Just be familiar that they existed during this time. I think the big idea with all of this is that we went through another religious revival, that you did see the spread of Christianity, and it wasn't limited to just, you know, the elite or the churchgoers. It was open for everyone. And it was, like I said, these camp meetings, they were shared with slaves, they were shared with freedmen, they were shared with women. Everybody could go. So it was open to everybody at this point. Okay? All right, we got to move on to big idea number 8. The rise of democratic and individualistic beliefs and the social changes brought on by the market revolution led to a significant effort to reform American society. This is where we kind of put it all together. Hang on. Let me answer this question before I move on. Oh, come on. So Transcendentalism was spread to America from Europe, but yeah, Transcendentalism was an American ideal. It grew out of the Romanticism values and the Romanticism and human perfection ideas that were coming from Europe. But Transcendentalism, that idea, was created by Ralph Waldo Emerson, and that was American at this point. Okay? All right, so here we go. Let's put it all together. So you have, you know, our market revolution. So our country's growing economically. We're becoming more and more interdependent on one another. And then you also have the Second Great Awakening and this religious revival that says we need to reform society and make it better, make it more perfect so that, you know, our lives as Americans are better. You have the transcendentalists who are looking for human individualistic perfection and stuff. And all of this leads to this movement towards this moral reforming of the American society. Okay, and we're going to see all these different movements start to grow. I think the first biggest one is the Temperance Movement. Alcohol was seen as a hurdle to get over, to get to, you know, morality and stuff like that. And so we're going to see this Temperance Movement, and this Temperance Movement, starting in the 1830s, 1840s, is going to continue all the way into the 1920s, and it's about the complete abstinence or the complete rejection of alcohol from our lives. And that's what that was about. But that wasn't the only movement during this time. You also had the Abolition Movement. William Lloyd Garrison is going to start this movement towards ending slavery in our country. And I think I know I said this in my video. Garrison was seen as a nut at this time. These guys, a lot of these reform movements are kind of on the fringe of society. They will start growing. They will start making them into mainstream society. But initially, they were kind of seen on the fringe, kind of the radical part of society. William Lloyd Garrison is going to print a paper called The Liberator, and he's going to start the American Anti-Slavery Society. Emancipation had been achieved in the North already, but many states still were not giving rights to freedmen. You know, you got your freedom, but there's no rights. And that's one thing that that Garrison was fighting for as well. It wasn't just about ending slavery, but it was also about giving rights to the freedmen and stuff like that. But, you know, this was blocked. This movement was really honestly blocked a lot by the southern states. And obviously so, I mean, economically, they're dependent on slavery at this point. But they're also fearful of what could happen. And I think what you're going to start seeing happen in the South during the 1830s, during the 1840s, is you're going to start seeing more and more crackdown, more and more harsh treatment of the slaves due to the fear that Southerners are starting to experience with regards to the behavior of the slaves. You saw, and I'm trying to put it all together here for you, you have the egalitarianism of the Second Great Awakening, the sharing of faith, the sharing of Christianity, and that was happening. But with some of this freedom, you started to see some, you know, these slave rebellions are starting to rise up, and the South is terrified of slave rebellions. And in the 1830s or so, you have one of the largest ones in our history, the Nat Turner Rebellion, and that's going to happen in Virginia, where over 50 white people are going to be killed by this group of rebelling slaves. Now, the result of this is the plantation owners of the South, their fear of revolt is going to grow. And because of that, they're going to start being put in more and more actions and more restrictions on slaves to control, their actions, control their movements, so you don't see any other rebellions start to spring up. I mean, the fear of rebellions was real. I'm not, I don't want to, don't make light of that, because these rebellions were happening. I mean, the Haitian rebellion, although it had been 20, 30 years earlier, people still talked about that. And that because the Haitian Revolution was a slave rebellion. And then you have the Denmark Vesey Rebellion. Then you have the Nat Turner Rebellion. And there were other smaller ones around. So this fear was very real. And that's going to drive a lot of these decisions of the plantation owners and the black Southerners. Now, keep in mind, guys, during this time, most Southerners did not own slaves. Most Southerners at this point were yeoman farmers. They didn't have slaves, but they supported slavery in the South. And because there was still this caste system, the stratification of society, and to put it bluntly, as long as slaves were part of society, you would never, if you were white, you would never be at the bottom of the social structure. And so that's why so many people who did not have slaves in the South supported slavery during this time. Okay? So that's the abolition movement. You have the temperance movement, the education movement's going on. Horace Greeley is trying to bring in more education to this time. The women's movement, let's talk about that. I said I was going to come back to this. The women's movement during this time period, very important, because this is really the true beginning of it. And the big date you need to know is 1848. 1848 is the year that the Seneca Falls Convention was held. At the Seneca Falls Convention, the Declaration of Sentiments was created. And the women created this as their own Declaration of Independence, that we want our own independence, we want suffrage, we want all of that. And so this is going to be part of the women's movement. You're going to see people like Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Lucretia Mott and others who are going to become common names in the fight for women's rights. They didn't just want voting rights. They wanted equality in education. They wanted legal rights, all of that. So the women's movement's going to start here. And again, they're not going to get everything they want until like 1920. But you're going to see movements. And again, it's going to be Western states. And we'll talk more about this in later sections. But Western states are going to be the first to give women most of these rights. Okay? I mentioned the education. Noah Webster. Noah Webster's going to write the first American dictionary. So that's another part of the American identity during this time. So all of this is going on under this guise of the Reform movement. And, but it also still ties back to the market revolution and all that. All this kind of ties together. CJ, is that cottonocracy? Very much so. It connects to it. But when we talk about cottonocracy, we're talking about how cotton is going to become basically the foundation of all the decisions that southern states are making, because the economic reliance on cotton is so important that a lot of decisions are going to be made to protect the cotton industry. Okay, and that includes the slaves and everything. So keep that going forward. Okay, all right. Last big idea. I'm going to get to it, and then we'll do any questions you guys have. And that's going to be big idea number 9. And I already talked about this briefly. I actually just talked about it. The majority of Southern white people did not own enslaved people, but Southern culture ensured that the institution of slavery was part of the South's way of life, and thus it had to be protected. Guys, that's exactly what I was just saying just a few minutes ago. There was this racial hierarchy in the South that needed to be maintained, and that's why slavery became just part of the way of life. Economics, culture, everything was defined by agriculture, and agriculture was held up by the slave labor. And so that's why it's so important. And like CJ was asking, cotton is going to become the chief part. But here's the other thing. We talked a while back, when we were in periods 2, we talked about tobacco and the effect that it had on the soil. Cotton can also deplete the soil. And because we were making so much money from cotton, we were growing it, and we weren't using like crop rotations and stuff like that, and we started to deplete the soil through overproduction. What this is going to lead to is more westward expansion. And more westward expansion means more lands that need to be settled. More land settled, that means more people are going out there. They want to grow cotton. They want to take slaves out there. The debate about slavery is going to keep coming up. That's where when Thomas Jefferson said that the Compromise of 1820 was just a temporary solution, we're going to start seeing exactly what he meant by that as we go forward from this point, because we need more land. Our country needs more land to grow cotton. Okay? All right. So that's all the big ideas. And so now we get into, it is 8:50. Man, I'll give you about another 10 minutes, 10, 15 minutes or so. What questions can I answer for you at this time? Anything I didn't hit, or did I skip over something or anything like that? Checking my text messages. No questions coming in? See if we can get him in here. Hey, get up here. Come on. Gilligan, get up on the bed. Get up there. Come up. Gilligan's here. Here's Flynn. What is Tecumseh's Confederacy? CJ, that's referring back to just before the War of 1812. What Tecumseh was trying to do was create a confederacy of all the Native American tribes on the western frontier to push back against white encroachment on his lands. That's when he's going to work with the English, get the weapons, and start working with them and everything. So he's trying to do kind of something similar to what King Philip tried to do earlier, and others we'll see do, is trying to build a confederacy of Native American tribes to fight against white encroachment. Let's see. Which dog? The dog right here that's up here right now. That just jumped down. That is Flynn. And so Gilligan is down on the floor. He's right next to me. I'll get him up there in just a minute. We'll get him up there. Let's see. For social reform about education, what were the key takeaways from that? Basically, you're going to have Horace Greeley, who's going to try to create more public education schools, more schools for everybody. You're going to have Noah Webster create the first dictionary, which is going to be used in these schools. During this time period, the schools are going to use readers created, I believe, by Noah Webster during this time. And because of the Second Great Awakening, a lot of these readers are going to have Christian values written in there. So you're going to have a lot of, and that's what's going to be used to teach people to read and stuff. But you're going to see the rise of public education during this time period. The constitutional justifications for slavery. Basically, the only constitutional justification is going to go back to the 3/5 agreement. There's nothing in the Constitution that outlaws slavery, but there is something in the Constitution about counting slaves, and that kind of is the justification right there. Is the market revolution sort of a mini? No, Brad. The Industrial Revolution is part of the market revolution. The market revolution includes the Industrial Revolution. It includes the American system. It includes the growth of industry, the growth of agriculture in the South and the West, and the growth of communication, the growth of transportation. All of that falls under the umbrella of the market revolution. Let's see what else we get here. Do I think that if the cotton gin would not have been invented, would slavery been rid of sooner? Yes, absolutely. Because actually, if you look at the number of slaves in our country in the 1790s, our numbers were going down. And we had already we had, you know, emancipation going on in the North. We had the slave trade was going to be outlawed in the early 1800s, but the invention of the cotton gin is going to drive up the demand and drive up, well, it's going to drive up the supply of cotton, and the more cotton you have, the more demand, and then the more demand, meaning we need more workers to grow it and everything. So yeah, I absolutely believe that. Let's see, I already answered that question. James Audubon is a member of the Hudson River School, and he traveled west, and he painted thousands of species of birds. And that's why we have the Audubon Society today. That's the Preservation Society of Animals, but it's named after James Audubon. That's who he is. Okay, that's the question I answered. Daniel Webster is important in the sense that Daniel Webster was part of the Great Three. He was part of the, Henry Clay, John C. Calhoun, and Daniel Webster. They were all part of all the main discussions. He was from Massachusetts. He was a Whig. He's just part of, he's one of the main guys in Congress during this time. When we look at the Webster-Hain debate, let me pull that up for you real quick. I'm trying to remember what they were debating. That was the debate. Oh, that was debating tariffs, and that was debating tariffs in 1830. So they're basically debating the Tariff of Abominations during this time. And so Daniel Webster was debating on the behalf of the New England side. Haynes is going to be debating on behalf of the South. So that's what that was all about. The presidency of John Tyler, no, don't worry about that. We're gonna backtrack and get to John Tyler when we start our next unit. Our next unit actually, this unit goes to 1848. Our next unit actually backtracks and starts in 1844. So I'll cover Tyler then. Okay. Anything else? All right, I want to get Gilligan in here, and I want to get him up on the bed so you guys can see him, because I think you guys have earned that right to be the first one to see Gilligan. Gilligan, come here. Here he comes. I hear him. Come here, Gil. There he is. Come here. Hey, up on the bed. Gilligan, come on, get up here. He's right here. What do you have? Give me. Oh, goodness. Come here, Gilligan. Come on, get up here. Come on, get him. There he is. All right, guys. That is Gilligan. Come here, Gil. Come here, right here. Right here. There he is. There he is. All right. You got them both. You are the first class, the first group. Gilligan's debut. Here he is. What a good-looking boy. All right. The internal slave trade. That is the trade of slaves internally. The buying and selling of trades throughout our country. Okay, so we would have slave auctions, throughout our country in the different states, up in so that's basically what that's referring to. Revolution of 1800, that's the election of Thomas Jefferson, the shift of power from, the shift of power from the Democrats, or from the Federalists to the Democratic Republicans. It is historic, Dylan. It's a big day here. Gilligan, why you got your back on everybody? Come here. Come here. See? Yeah. So there you got the boys. All right. All right. Yes, very much so. Okay. Yes. All right. Anything else, guys? Get off me. Come on. Get over here. Stay there. Good boys. All right. Oh, yeah. He's good. Yeah. They're good-looking boys, aren't you? Look at them. Yeah. You see him? Yeah. There he is. Oh, yes. Okay. All right. Ladies and gentlemen, I think that's going to do it for this evening. It's almost 9 o'clock. It's in the history books. Look at him. He's just going to stay there. He's going to become a permanent fixture. Does it know tricks? Well, first of all, it's a he. Does he know tricks? He knows tricks. He knows how to sit. He knows how to, I don't teach him tricks like, Flynn can find anything I ask him to. If I tell him to go find his ball, he'll go find it. Go find your ball. Where's your ball? Go find it. Hurry up. So he'll bring it back here in just a minute. So he knows that kind of stuff. Gilligan, he's just cute. We just keep him around because he's cute. So Get up there. Get up there. See? He's got his ball. There you go. There's a trick for you. All right, guys. That's going to do it for tonight. I don't think you're going to have much trouble with the test tomorrow. I think it's pretty straightforward. I think you're going to find it manageable, much more manageable than the last one. So other than that, I hope you guys have a great evening. We will see you tomorrow. And man, 2 days, and we're on Thanksgiving break. Just hold on. We're going to make it. All right. We'll see you later, guys. Bye-bye.